Good morning. In the poem When Great Trees Fall, Maya Angelou tells us that when great trees fall, when great souls make their transition, that we can then be. We can be and be better for they existed. In that spirit, it is a pleasure to welcome you to our opening plenary for this year's Center for Urban Education Summer Educators Forum. I'm Elon Dancy, the Helen S. Faison Endowed Chair in Urban Education in the Pitt School of Education and Executive Director of the school's Center for Urban Education.
And I'm Stacey Akines. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the History Department of Carnegie Mellon University and a visiting student fellow at the University of Pittsburgh Center for Urban Education.
We are so grateful to our panelists for joining us and for sharing a bit about Dr. Ralph Proctor's work and impact on how we think about education and Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh. The questions we share with our panelists are starting places, but we welcome them to say whatever is important for them to say in this forum. Many thanks to our panelists from our Center for Urban Education team, and many thanks for to our audience for joining us. If you'd like to ask a question, please place them in the chat, and we may be able to get to it prior to the end of the session.
I'd like to introduce today's panelists. We have Rick Adams, who is a retired college administration for the Community College of Allegheny County, CCAC. Nelson Harrison, jazz musician, composer, and historian. And we also have Christopher Moore, producer, radio, and television talk show host.
Okay, let's begin. And I think we want to start with a broad and important question that is, who was Ralph Proctor? Who was Dr. Ralph Proctor? How did you know him? This is to each of our panelists. How did you know Dr. Ralph Proctor, and how will you remember him? Who might like to begin?
I'll start. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Ralph and I met as undergraduates in 1962 when he came. And I don't know what's the matter with my voice. Anyway, we became best friends, and we called ourselves brothers by another mother. We started the 62, that was when we were highly segregated. I mean, seriously segregated at Pitt. Pitt was so bad that if a white girl was seen walking across the campus with anybody non-white, the dean of women would call her in for a psychiatric examination. That's what was happening. And so Ralph decided to form a chapter of the NAACP, a Pitt chapter. So I was one of the charter members, and we formed a Pitt chapter, the NAACP. We were protesting some of the discriminatory things in town. Notably, I remember Duquesne Light had 4,000 employees. They had 4 black, and they were all janitors. So we picketed Duquesne Light Company downtown, and then we decided, better than being out there with our buddies, we go home and call up their phones and tie them up so they couldn't do any business. So we had a phone campaign, and we just kept their phones busy till they were ready to talk to somebody. And then comes 1963. 1963, Ralph and I and a couple others formed a group that went to the March on Washington. So we took 2 train cars down to the march. One of the videos that they show on QED of that day, my sister was getting off one of the trains. When I got down there, I'm a Q, so I looked down the street. The Q headquarters are in DC. So I looked about a block ahead of where we were going to join the main march, and I saw nothing but purple and gold. I said to Ralph, "I'll see you later. I'm going down with the frat." So I hurried up and went down, ran into Jesse Jackson, whom I had known a year before. And we spent the rest of the day together, Jesse and I and 4 other brothers. So that's how far Ralph and I go back. We found out that we think alike on so many different dimensions, that in our teaching careers, I'm jumping ahead now, in our teaching careers, Ralph and I have a very similar style of teaching, to the point where I know you introduced me as a jazz musician. I do have a doctorate in clinical psychology from Pitt, and I'm an adjunct professor in psychology at CCAC. But I started teaching at Pitt back in the 70s. And so my trade is music, and I've been a professional musician since I was 13 years old. And that's when I made my first $5, and it took me around the world and made me famous. But I never went to school for that. I had a band when I was in a band when I was 12 years old with my older brother and his peers. And we were playing, it was a big band, and we were coached by a person you know as Judge Warren Watson, who was also a very, very, very great musician. He's now 101 years old. And he has jam sessions at his house still every 2 weeks. So we still go over there and get mentored by him, because you can't probe him, he's too deep. You know, these guys are so deep. But anyway, we had a chance to played the Glenn Miller book. We played a couple of parts. I'm a little 12-year-old kid, and I'm saying, oh my God, this music's so great. Could I ever be involved in that somehow, you know? 25 years later, I get a phone call from Count Basie Band. And Eddie Lockjaw Davis called me. And I had just gotten married. Actually, I've been married about 5 years. And 9 o'clock to midnight, he said, Nelson, this is Eddie Lockjaw Davis. I said, what's up, jealous? You know, I was shocked, but I tried to be cool. And he said Al Gray was leaving the Basie Band, and David Baker recommended me to take his place. That's my dream come true. I had to turn it down because I was on my internship. So I turned it down. Wound up, I turned Basie down 3 times before I went. Every time he called, I wasn't quite finished with school. So the 3rd time he called, my wife was in graduate school, so I turned it down again. In the meantime, I'm shrinking heads for Pitt Student Health. I'm teaching psychology. I'm making $12.50 an hour. And I turn on the TV. Basie Band's on the Grammy Awards. They're at the Kennedy Center. I'm saying I'm supposed to be there, and I'm doing this, you know. And I said, Lord have mercy, if they ever call again, if Count dies before I go out, I'll go crazy. But if they ever call again, I'm going. So this is where Ralph comes in. Fall of 1978, I got another phone call. It was James Brown's trombone player, you know. And I had met Fred in 68 when I played with James Brown. I played him a couple of years, 67, 68. So Fred called me up. Nelson, this is Fred Wesley. I said, hey, Fred, what's up? He says, I'm with the Basie Band. I said, really? He said, man, I got to go do a record for Bootsy. Can you come and finish out the tour? I said, yep. He said, can you be in New Orleans in 4 days? I said, yep. I was teaching human sexuality for student health, and I was still shrinking heads. And I called Ralph. Ralph was assistant dean at the time. I said, this is what the conversation was. Hey, Ralph, the Basie Band called me again. I'm going. Can you come and finish my class? He said, yep. I walked out of my class. Ralph walked in my class, and that was the end of that. We've been doing that ever since. So then when he got the job at Elon Education now, when he got the job at community college, he said, why don't you come over here? You can teach here anytime you want. So I started teaching about 25 years ago. And whenever he was sick or something, hey, he says, I got to be in hospital this week. Can you come do my classes? Yep. I just walk in and do his classes. Whenever I needed somebody to sub for me, I said, Ralph, take my class. He walked in. We never compared notes. So over the years, I was able to tell all of my classes, there's only 2 people at community college that teach the way I do. It's me and Ralph Proctor. We're the only 2. And it was never, there was never a glitch. And we never compared notes. But we approached life the same way and teaching the same way. So that's the way it had been all the way up to the end. And my last conversation with him was, man, we still got a lot of things to do. We were going to write books together and stuff. And he said, man, I'm tired. I said, I know, but we got stuff to do. And I perked him up for that conversation, but it got too much for him. So I'll stop there.
Nelson, thank you, because it's rare that I can get into a gathering, and I think among the three panelists, I think I'm the youngest. So it's a rarity when I can get in the room and say I'm the youngest. So I'm gonna take advantage of that.
Okay.
But, when you spoke about you and Ralph, Dr. Proctor, getting together in '62,
Mhm.
well, guess what? I was getting ready to go into seventh grade at West Hills High School that next year in '63.
Okay.
But Dr. Proctor raised me in a interesting kind of way, intellectually, and he fed into my very keen interest on what was going on with Black people and the movement. And of course, there were so many things going on. But once you were in that, I don't know what to call it. I'll call it a tornado, which Pittsburgh unfortunately has had recently. But I say that to say, as a teenager, I could watch and hear Malcolm for a little while, not as much, but certainly Dr. King, and you name all of the people that were the stars, if you will, of the movement, Huey and Bobby Seale, all that kind of stuff. And here's this Black man on my TV talking about a lot of that, bringing in African art and Black Horizons. I mean, that was something that really taught me. And as I began my journey, I had the opportunity and tremendous privilege to go into Bowdoin College. And when I got up there, one of the things I got to do was to take part, about 4 other students, in an independent study, as they called it. And we designed the first interdisciplinary Afro-American studies program at Bowdoin. And so that was such a eye-opening experience, and a healthy one in terms of how things develop within academia, within institutions, the whole curricular piece that we got to look at and answer some major questions under the tutelage of a professor. Throughout Ralph's life, I was on the Human Relations Commission. He certainly was the activist, which 67 in Westinghouse, I kind of just dropped a pin there and marked my involvement in the Black freedom, Black power, civil rights movement, and have not turned back ever since. And what I have seen in the time I was privileged to work with Ralph is that he had courage in a way that a lot of people don't. And I would say he was the quintessential inside warrior. I mean, he knew how to work within an institution and work with the students and his fellow administrators. And he applied his discipline and his skill set to matching, I would say, scholarship for change. His interaction with students was always about getting them engaged, getting them centered in themselves, especially the younger students who particularly needed it, but all students really needed it, including me when I went back to school years ago and was about to cry. After I avoided statistical courses all that time, I get to my master's level and I got to take this course. I'm like, oh, professor, help me. I got to pass it. But that need for centering self and developing confidence and then having a focus on goals, Ralph was a master at that. I mean, he helped students in ways that I would just have to sit back and with mouth open, frankly. I also have done for a number of years, and my other older brother here, Chris, he's the media man, star excellence, and I've done a little bit of radio hosting and communications, which I think unites all of us in so many ways. If it's music, if it's radio, if it's TV, now with the new technologies, internet-based technologies, that theme runs all the way through it. And I'll stop there with that. But the dude had courage. Like a lot of professionals would not do what he did. And I just took so many notes from his tutelage. I ended up being assistant to the president, but first assistant to Dr. Proctor as chief diversity officer, or the DEI guru, if you will. And he taught me everything, as he would often say, if I leave this position, he knows everything I know because I'm making sure he knows it. So that's the kind of guy he was. He mentored people and guided them.
I can pick up on that, on Ralph's courage. Um, I, my younger brother here, my astute younger brother, I came home from Vietnam in 1971 and finally got a communications job, moved to St. Louis 5 years, came here in 1980. And by then, Black Horizons was well underway. And what's so strange about that is WQED didn't even have a Black person who could produce it, let alone host it. And Virginia Bartlett was the first producer. She was a white woman. Well, Ralph said, we need more people on staff who understand Black culture, the Black experience. And he was responsible for WQED building a program that taught people the TV business as directors, as producers, as hosts, and Black Horizons was the growth ground, was the laboratory for all of that. And so there are people who came out of that program who are working in Hollywood, directing videos and films now in New York and doing all sorts of things. So Ralph had that kind of vision and that foresight and that braveness to tell QED, you all don't know what you're doing. You need somebody here. And so he began hosting the program also, but he was responsible for that effort to train people, which worked so well and produced so many broadcast specialists that are working throughout the industry right now, right out of WQED. And I inherited the position after he left, and he made sure I was almost as militant as he was. I remember he used to make the crew mad with some of the things he would say to people who run camera. I'm sick of all this Black stuff. And he would straighten them out. So Ralph was the man. He was brave. He spoke truth to power. He created programs to train and educate others. He was unselfish about that. And that's what I know of him.
I appreciate your reflection so much. Deep, absolutely beautiful. And I think that there are themes that we're going to return to in this conversation. For sure, the idea of courage and how do we build courage, sort of honoring and learning from Dr. Proctor's activist history for sure. And then also you're reminding us in the opening about how Dr. Proctor was maybe what we discussed today as a public intellectual, and how that was another praxis of Dr. Proctor's through which we can learn. So thank you so much for that opening. Stacey?
Can I say something real quickly from what Chris was saying?
Sure.
In 1968, Ralph had me come over to Black Horizons, and I became the music director. Well, I would put on local bands, half-hour shows, and I was in graduate school, and so I'd pick a local band and we'd do a show. And then when they didn't have a show, sometimes they'd do a rerun of some of the music shows I did. And I'm walking around Langley Hall, and they're saying, "What are you doing? You spend all your time over at QED, or your studying must be suffering." I'm saying, I didn't even know it was on TV. It was a rerun or something. But the environment, as Chris was indicating, I'm sure you got a little bit of it, Chris. It was a kind of a racist environment. And Ralph never bit his tongue. If he'd tell you straight up to your face. And we found out what they were doing is they were using our tapes over again. They were erasing our tapes. So we didn't have a record of it. Now, they kept the tapes they wanted to archive, but the black tapes, they erased them and used them over again. And we also had a show called Lifestyles, if Chris might remember that. And I interviewed Earl Garner one-on-one on Lifestyles. They erased the tape. So we were in that very overt, segregated, racist environment, but we never took back. We speak right in their face and tell them what time of day it was. And that happened all the time. So,
Thank you.
That's right.
When I think about Dr. Proctor, it brings to mind noted historian and creator of Negro History Week, which we now know as Black History Month, Carter G. Woodson. His first publication, The Education of the Negro Prior to 1861, was a history of education, which speaks to the educational history as being one of the fundamental pillars of Black history. One of Dr. Proctor's first pieces of scholarship is a history of education. His dissertation titled Racial Discrimination Against Black Teachers and Black Professionals in the Pittsburgh Public School Systems, 1834 to 1973. That's a long time. His dissertation meets at the intersections of educational history, labor history, and the history of Black Pittsburgh. It shows Dr. Proctor's emphasis on the role and the power of education in Pittsburgh to Black liberation. Like Carter G. Woodson, Proctor taught Black history on a community level and made it accessible to working class people. Dr. Proctor used groundbreaking methodology in his dissertation with the oral interviews and earned his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Proctor could have worked at any elite university on the planet. What does Dr. Proctor's decision to teach at CCAC say about his commitments to community as well as academia writ large?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's to whoever wants to answer it, but I was comparing Dr. Proctor's work to Carter G. Woodson's work, with starting off both of their careers with a history of education and how the history of education is kind of fundamental, one of the fundamental pillars of Black history.
Oh, yeah,
And,
I got that.
and noting that he got a degree from the University of Pittsburgh, doing foundational work in oral history, taking the histories of everyday people of Pittsburgh. He could have worked at any university in the nation, across the planet, but he chose to work at CCAC. So the question was, what does that say about his commitment to community and the education of the community in Black history?
Well, from my personal experience with him, he was all in all the time. And we used to joke with each other because we didn't do anything 99%. Anything we did was 100%. And it wasn't a matter of high or low because we stayed in the community and we talked to the common people. And one of Ralph's strengths was the fact that he was of the people, so that when it comes to oral history, he was able to do it. And I was always, one of my biggest pet peeves was that academics don't know how to do oral history because they send people out, I call them walking pencils. They send you out in the community to interview people and you're asking demographic questions. And the people won't talk to you unless they trust. And you can't do that by asking census questions or something like that. And then if you don't embed yourself in the community, you'll never get the truth out of the people in the community. Well, Ralph was always part of the community, so he always got the truth because there was no barrier between him and the community. But very few have done it since him like that. So let me go back a little bit too, because just in terms of the history of education in Pittsburgh, my maternal grandmother, Sophie Nelson, she named the first 6 Black teachers in Pittsburgh in 1946. She came from Alabama with a bachelor's degree. She had it at age 18 in Alabama, came up here in 1923. to be a teacher. Of course, they never heard of black teachers, so she got involved in the NAACP. She became the first state president of the NAACP in Pennsylvania in 1934. She, with the NAACP lawyers and whatever, she helped Judge Homer Brown get his appointment. She helped him get on the school board as the first black on the school board. And it took from 1923 to 1934 to 1946 for the board to agree to hire 6 black teachers. And Judge Brown said, Sophie Nelson's going to name them. And she took 6 of her NAACP girls, and they were the first 6 black teachers. Wasn't Helen Faison was the next group that came, but Marie Mellon, Sarah Harvey, I'm getting some of the names now, but you'll know that. So that started. So I come from 3 generations of educators, and Pitt is our family school. And my family, siblings, aunts and uncles, their parents, children, we have 50 degrees in Pitt, going back to 1928. And the last thing I ever wanted to do was be a teacher. And here I'm teaching. So, but the educational thing, now, philosophically, you touched on something that I would just want to comment on. Philosophically, the public school system was started in around 1898 by John Rockefeller. And Rockefeller said he funded it, he started and funded it. And he says, I do not want a worker, I don't want a community of thinkers, I want a community of workers. So the school system was designed from the beginning not to teach you how to think. And that's why we're struggling right now. Now, all of my classes at community college, first thing I say is, this class is about life. It's not about a subject area. And the question is, who am I? And if you get those 2 things together, everything else falls into place. And they're not used to that. And Ralph's the only other person that ever did it that way. And once you get people to think, I said, I don't want to teach you what to think. I want to teach you how to think, because that's what you're going to need to know to make it. So that's the philosophy that he and I shared.
I saw Ralph put in motion, in action, many a times, the pedagogy of the oppressed, Pablo Freire. I mean, he didn't say that, but that's what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And he would reach the average dude, the average woman, where they were. And he definitely wanted not an elite stepping stone. People could go where they wanted as it led them, but he definitely was interested in empowering the everyday working class. Mm-hmm. You know, the low income, the first in their family to ever even think about, let alone approaching an institution of higher education. And I got to give University of Pittsburgh, particularly what was first the Black Studies program and department, that they were very clear. I almost don't even want to start naming names, but Rob Penny and Curtis Porter and Ralph, and there's so many, and forgive me, everybody that I know that I've now not said their names, but they were very much about the communiversity, the college without walls, taking it into the community, that the community had to be part of it. And that affected me greatly as far as my attitude toward education. I was at CCAC for 35, 36 years. And so I was an administrator, but that mission, to me, my personal mission was to get out the way as I supported faculty so that teaching and learning could go on. And then, as I mentioned, when I was at Bowdoin College, I did a double major. So I came out with government or political science major, and I came out with an Afro-American studies major. And so I did the broad thing between political science courses, history classes, economics, sociology, psychology. What did I leave out? I mean, I was looking at the whole spectrum of the human entity, being, and how many different ways those different disciplines intersected, and then bringing that to students and get them to get the light in their eyes that whatever way they wanted to go, that they were first well grounded. But that was the mission coming out of now Africana studies, and there were other social work and places, but there was something very special happening coming out of the university. But it was happening because once Black folk got in the door, they knew what to do with it. And so I think that's something we should never forget, and we should tell that story so that we could model that behavior to all of the students of the future, the current students and the students that are to come. Because as many have noted, the students are the foot soldiers of change. They're the ones that typically, and I always laugh because I see it in myself in my own career. At first, I was too young, too inexperienced, too crazy to be afraid of anything. I was like, I was born Black and I'm proud, as I like to say. So I wasn't getting off no sidewalks, ducking my eyes, none of that stuff. I remember all of us going around with the little forebears of the boombox. And when James Brown came on the Black radio station, I'm Black and I'm proud, we went everywhere we went. We got on the bus downtown, we'd play it as loud as we could, and we'd shout it and sing it everywhere. So it was a tremendous mass awakening, and a perfect example of what was needed in that period, and is still needed, is a Dr. Proctor, someone from the community. He would say, let's see, how would he say it? I'm a thug with a PhD.
I was just getting ready to say that.
He was
That's
very
right.
proud of his roots in the community. Would you say you told him not to say that?
No, I said I was just getting ready to say the same
Oh, you
thing.
can ready to say it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's how much he was ingrained in the community. And again, the way it looked real to me, if I could put it that way, is when I saw him, he would take on independent studies. I don't know how many, any semester, he would have 2 or 3 at least. He might have more. Well, he'd pull somebody aside, whatever the circumstance. They were having real difficulty, or they didn't have the credits they needed to graduate on their timetable. The school wasn't offering the course. In a minute, he'd say, "Oh, come on, sit with me. I'm gonna register you. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna fix this." And he did it countless times.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What we have to, when we're in the educational environment, we have to challenge the system, because the system wasn't designed for us. It wasn't designed to free us. It was designed to keep us suppressed and to victimize us. Right. And you can't fix a problem. This is from Einstein. I thought it up. I found out Einstein said it. You can't fix a problem. You can't fix a problem at the level the problem manifests.
Mm.
If you do, all you're doing is shuffling things around, but you're not coming up with solutions. So I have a problem right now. I'm thinking about, we have diversity programs, multicultural programs, all of those things that are pointing out the differences. What happened to humanity? What we need are humanity programs, because that's where the common denominator is. And a diversity program or a differential program or problem has to have a common denominator. And I found out doing IQ tests and stuff over the years that the human mind of most of us can't find a common denominator. But we can point out a detail. And what I learned through psychology is when they found out what the left and right brain were doing, because we've been shut into our left brain, which is a serial processor, which only sees details. And it can't come up with a common denominator. And if the right brain, which we don't talk to, is the creative mind, is where music goes through, as it can find a common denominator among an infinite array of variables, but we never use it and we never talk to it, and because we're trained not to use it. Mm-hmm. I could give you a test right now and you'd fail it. You want to try it? Here it is. What does a chair and a table have in common? You got 10 seconds.
They're set.
Where? What did you say?
I said they're a set.
Zero.
Table and a chair, or four tables, four chairs, two
See,
chairs, whatever.
nope. What do they have in common? Totally, equally. 10 seconds have been gone a long time ago, right?
Have four legs. No, that ain't true.
That's 0, 0, 0. That's a detail. See what I mean, Rick? That's a detail. You're going to a detail.
Mm-hmm.
What's the common denominator between a chair and a table?
People use them to sit and eat.
Yeah, but see how difficult it is. We're struggling with it. The answer is their furniture. Why couldn't we come up with that? That applies to all chairs and tables. They're furniture, right? Doesn't matter what they're shaped or what you're using them for and all that. They're furniture. We can't come up with that because we're not used to finding common denominators.
And what you just said is a perfect example of the challenge and the duty of the educator to get people.
Sure, because that's what education is. If you find common denominators, you learn something, you got solutions.
And draw connections. Absolutely.
Sure, that's what connect the dots. You go to school and you're taught a subject, and they give you all the dots. Nobody teaches you how to connect the dots. And then after the semester's over, you don't remember it. I have kids coming into like 108, 106, whatever, and I said, you had 101? What do you remember from 101? Duh, I don't remember anything. Well, what's the point of education if you don't remember it? Right? You can't remember it because you have never put it together and integrated it into whatever else you have in your mind. Learning is taking new information and integrating it into what you presently have, and then resorting it and throwing out what's obsolete. We don't do that. The schools don't do it. The PhD programs don't do it.
Well, that's where that community, to me, that's where that community connection comes, and you can approach it from so many different ways. I mean, most of us, unfortunately, I have yet, I don't know what I'm waiting on. I teasingly say I'm gonna live forever, but I do want to go to the motherland and to the continent. Haven't been there. I mean, I got a lot of cinema and reading and real life people I've talked to, so I got all that, but it's nothing like going there. But Ralph, with his art, and unfortunately, it's a little better now, I hope. But I grew up, I was cheering for Tarzan to whip up the indigenous people in Africa. I was ignorant as everybody else was. But our knowledge, if you're not from there, and for so long, because of different things in our history and our cultural oppression and certainly our historical separation, many Black families would not talk about it. They would kind of like not even bring it up or acknowledge that connection. But once you start to do things like that, because what do people really know now? I know when I get so mad watching the media, and they always show stuff that, everybody's starving or they're fighting or something. They don't show the big cities. They don't show the universities. It's like a continuation of now in the ghetto, except on a rural level, just like they do Homewood and different neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. They don't show what they should be showing. Knock on wood, all the time I've been in Homewood and East End, I recognize there's a crime problem, but I never seen anybody get shot. Now, I might have came upon it afterward, but you would think, and I think that's what some people think, that's how life is. Not for 90-some percent of
Rick, let me bring this back to Ralph, because I know that's what he did at QED, telling people there was more about Black culture than what the media showed. Those horrifying scenes of somebody getting shot, and that's all they think that we do. But Ralph, as Nelson said, he brought music of all kinds on. It's disappointing to hear that they erased those shows, but they did the same thing to me when I left Channel 2 in Arkansas. I called back there and said, can I get a copy of that show? We did. Oh, we used the tape. So that kind of stuff happened everywhere, but it didn't stop Ralph from fighting and presenting a better side of our lives and our culture. I don't know if Little Black Horizons, under his tutelage, could counteract all that was on the evening news, but it was there and it was showing something different. And by that, he was teaching still.
Right. That's very, yeah, exactly right. One of the things about educational philosophy that I think we have totally ignored, because when you're trained in the formal education, you're trained toward detail. Now let's look at skin color. You look at a human being and the complexion of the skin is a detail, correct? And yet we identify our whole self with that detail. Is that who we are?
Absolutely not.
So
No.
then how are you going to solve a problem when we're fighting over a detail, which is really kind of insignificant, except when it comes to the ultraviolet rays of the sun? It doesn't have anything to do with your ethics. It doesn't have anything to do with your intelligence. It doesn't have anything to do with anything except the sun rays. And we think that's who we are. So to be a white supremacist, black supremacy doesn't obliterate white supremacy. It's just as stupid as white supremacy, because that's not what we are. We're human beings. And we have 99.99% in common as human beings. And we take a detail like, oh, you got blue eyes and you got brown eyes. Oh my goodness, let's kill each other. Or the gang kids in the neighborhood, Rick, you know this, in East End, the Crips in Wilkinsburg were wearing Nike shoes and the Crips in Homewood were wearing Reebok shoes, and they go kill each other over a logo. Because every time you divide by a detail, you have an excuse to obliterate the other. Where does that stop? It doesn't stop. And it doesn't move toward a solution. Solutions are common denominators.
That's right.
Well, when are we going to wake up and realize that?
I think one of the gifts of many that Dr. Proctor had was his ability to strategize. And I don't know that I heard him say this, but I could hear him, look like it came in my head that, you know, strategy is everything. And he was a master at putting together resources. He would investigate the structure. I think I referred to his institutional skill. Probably Ralph, I was thinking about this. Ralph probably threatened or did sue about everybody he worked for.
I think so.
That's part of that courage. But I mean, he would like, no. And he would do his homework. And if it wasn't that kind of situation relative to him or all of us, now sometimes he would use that strategy to get people and resources in place to continue and duplicate what was good, what was black, if you will. So within an institution, he would figure out who were the key allies, who were the black folk you could trust, who were the other folk, white or otherwise, that you could trust. What was the opportunity, issue or location or rule or something that if you change this thing here, it would change this thing over here. And it would continue if people kept on that path for further progress. And so I think that's one of the best things he did. His fingerprints would be everywhere. He would talk to everybody. And some people thought he was real. Well, they didn't have to think it. They knew he was outspoken. But I was always amazed who he could talk to. It didn't matter. People who you might think instinctively weren't going to be on our side, if I could put it that way. He would figure out why and how they would help us. And so that's a unique skill.
Well, let me tell you why he did that. Because he saw the big picture. When you see the big picture, the details go where they're supposed to go. You know exactly where to put them. But if you only see the detail, you're struggling, and you don't know what's around the corner, what's behind you, what's in front of you. Ralph was he'd see the big picture. It's like a chessboard. He knew where all the places were supposed to go, and if things weren't right, he knew where to go tweak this, tweak that, tweak the other, because it starts with the big picture. By the way, that's the right brain again.
That's right.
The details will never get you anywhere.
You know, when he came to CCAC, I was thinking about that earlier. Dr. Edna McKenzie.
That's right. Yeah.
She put that program together. And, you know, if you heard Ralph tell it, he would say, she called him and said, Ralph, I'm getting ready to leave here, and you got to come here and keep this going and develop it. You got
Exactly
to.
right.
And he'll say he didn't really want to do it. He said, well, you know, I've done this, I've done that, but no, you got to do this. And if you knew Edna McKenzie, you didn't tell her no easily.
But Ralph, if he took it, he would do it 100% better than anybody. And
Well,
everything he did like that. You
yeah,
know, he was a master photographer. Did you know that?
yeah. I mean, there's
He
so many
worked, he
things
worked
he's
for
good
Heinz.
at, I forget them.
He worked for Heinz Corporation. He did all their commercial photography, bought the cameras and everything, and he did things for them that nobody could follow. He shot my wedding,
Okay.
and you know, and he left. They brought in a Japanese guy and looked at some of Ralph's work, and the Japanese guy said, "That's impossible. That's impossible." Ralph said, "Well, I didn't know it was impossible. I just did it."
Yeah, yeah. He worked in banking. I know he told me for a while. Now I never would connect. I'm like, banking? What were you doing over there? But he had such a rich personal experience and resource base. We had to get approval from the college council. We call it a CCAC. For I'm trying to think. We went through so many different name changes. I think it was we presented as African and Ethnic Studies, I believe.
Yeah, Africana and Ethnic Studies is what it's called now.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
And the chair of the department, because it wasn't a department, so he was a historian, he was up under the history department, and a number of key members of the faculty there were helpful. Other council members, because it was a broad council across the college that had to be, and it was faculty driven. I mean, I went as a guest since I was an administrator. But he was able to knit together, because one point we went and we were turned down.
Hmm.
And then another point we went back, and Ralph and I tried to help talk to a number of people to come with us, because we said we were turned down. They asked us to come back and fix whatever. So we came back and we were received like, well, what are you doing here? He said, well, you told us to come back. And I forgot if they said in the next meeting or two meetings, but we came back when they said for us to come back. So of course we were insulted. And I'll never forget one of the seemingly meek, mild sisters of the faculty. She rose up and read them the riot act, and it got passed. But the machinations we had to go through, and you know, but everybody kept their cool and kept professional. And the one that they expected, probably me or Ralph or somebody else, this faculty member usually did not, but got very, very, and you know, the power of organizing, the power of being right, being on the right side, the moral position, all of that was in practice there through that struggle, if you will. And in fact, I need to go back and see what have they done with the department in terms of who's heading it now.
Well, they're working on it as far as I'm
Yeah, I kind of heard that, but you know, we've been around. That makes me feel nervous. Like, you're working on what you doing?
Yeah.
You
I
know.
forgot a name when I talked about the first Black teachers. The name I forgot was Gertrude Wade. She was
Okay.
one of them. You heard of her name, right?
Oh yeah.
She was one of the first six.
My
My grandma.
my aunt was in there somewhere. Ethel Stewart. She came in there.
Yeah.
Maybe I guess that would have been the 50s. I guess.
Yeah, this was 46. So yeah.
But I know she was one of the early ones coming to the Pittsburgh district, which has proven very, what do I want to say, resilient / resistant in
Oh,
terms
sure.
of the
Pittsburgh
different
was very.
struggles we've had.
We had integrated schools, and at Westinghouse, you know, you were there. I don't know if you had Dr. Felton as a principal, did you?
No, no.
No, you're too young for that.
Yeah.
We were, in my time, we were 40% Black to white. My mother graduated, it was 5% Black in 1930 to white.
And see,
And
when
my
I was,
mother's younger sister with a PhD in English from Pitt in 51, but she was the first Black valedictorian from Westinghouse. In 1934, she was the valedictorian of Billy Strayhorn's class at age 15. because her parents were teachers, you know. And so, and then her younger sister was going to be the second Black valedictorian in class of 36 at age 15. And she was a gifted concert pianist. She accompanied the National Negro Opera Company and all that. And McVicker, you had him probably, he changed her A to a B in music. And she didn't get the valedictory. But 75 years later, we had a meeting at the board and they restored it to her, even though she had passed away.
One name, Dr. Dancy, you mentioned a name, I think at least twice, and I always smile. Helen Faison, Dr. Faison. And she was an assistant principal when I was there, Nelson, Westinghouse.
Yeah.
And there were 3,000 people. Look at me now, and I said, we had 3,000 of us. We were in all kind of claws. I mean, we were in that school because the white folks had permission to bypass us. They lived close and in Homewood. They went to Peabody and Alderdice and were not forced to come to Homewood, which was fine with me. But we had about, I would say, no more than 5 or 6 white students.
Mm-hmm.
So that when we took over the school and walked out in '68, the whole community was in uproar. You know, you figure there's 100,000 plus, but if 3,000 of us leave, and you count our parents and our brothers and sisters and cousins and all that, because, you know, 75% of my family went to, everybody went to Westinghouse on the
Right.
East End.
One of the worst things was magnet schools. Think about it. They decided to make schools subject oriented when they were neighborhood schools. We used to walk to school. Now, to get a subject, you got to get on a bus to Alderdice, or go across the town, or go to Brashear, where your parents don't have a neighborhood.
Right.
And you're going to school. So that's the end of PTA organizations, because the parents aren't welcome in the neighborhood where the kids are going to school.
Right.
Now, whoever came up with that idea, getting a PhD in education or something, it was a stupid idea. And that started messing it up.
I'm sure Dr. Proctor was involved. If I'm trying to think how this time would flow, with him on or around being on the Human Relations Commission, that he was part of that agreement that was, everybody knew, but people didn't know. And the agreement was Homer Brown and the HRC statewide said that Westinghouse didn't have to be integrated and that it could have extra resources to help students who were first time going to college and that kind of thing, you know. And for years, that's why I never had anything done to the structure of it, because it was written somewhere, but largely kind of hush-hush, that the white folks, they weren't going to force them to come. And those are the kind of issues that where the rubber hits the road.
Well, if you recall, Rick, Westinghouse was always integrated until your time.
Yep.
When they tore down the hill in '56, all the blacks moved to the east. And I grew up on Blackador and Brushton, and my neighbors are 80% Italian neighborhood. But they all moved out to the woods and built Verona and Penn Hills. Yeah. And they ran because the blacks came from the Hill District to Homewood. That's when Westinghouse became black.
Yeah.
Because we were the minority.
Right there. I had white.
We all got along. The students got along. We didn't have any racial problems in the school. We were crazy about each other. But, you know, the principal was racist and we'd laugh at him, but the black students were the top students. The white students in my day, I graduated in '59, didn't have to go to college because they could get a job in Murphy's 5 and 10 or a retail store or a union or something like that and raise a family. We couldn't even sit at the counter in Murphy's 5 and 10 or Isley's. Huh? So we had to go to college. So I look at my yearbook, and out of 103 students, there were 68 in the college club. And out of the 68 in the college club, there was only 18 white. But they were the majority in the school.
So I actually have a question here. In many ways, I feel like it follows up to the question that Stacey just asked. So as I think about Dr. Proctor's scholarship, I'm thinking about his dissertation and how he helps us to understand you know, what is happening to Black teachers in Pittsburgh, Black students in Pittsburgh, well before Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. In many ways, I hear us talking about um, schooling experience for you, prior to about Brown versus Board of Education, and perhaps thinking about what it is now. And so, despite these ongoing narratives about the progress of Brown, what I also hear from you in the conversation, I'm thinking, Professor Harrison, about your comments about schooling functioning as it was designed, continuing to function in that way. Then what that would mean is that the interventions, so for instance, the interventions of a Brown v. Board of Education policy, that it's still not resulting in the kind of liberatory or self-determination aims that Black communities and knowledges have been articulating, since capture. And so, today we see the large elimination of teachers. I mean, we see the kinds of what we might understand as apartheid structures or domination schooling that continue to characterize particularly urban schools. And so then I'm wondering, how might Dr. Proctor's scholarship and thinking help us understand why this persists, so that if there are interventions that we understand as truly progressive ones, then why does that persist? Or should we understand these progressive interventions as also part of a grand design that still is not um, capable of providing the liberatory education that we seek?
I think you about answered the question yourself. The system's not capable because they don't want it to be capable.
You're
With
right,
all
Chris.
deliberate speed, the Supreme Court said, in terms of integration. And I grew up in the South, and whenever they tried to integrate a school, they just went and formed them a new Christian school and got away from us because they were private. Nobody tried to attend that. I think it is on purpose that those things that Dr. Proctor talked about introducing into education, he did introduce them into television broadcasts here. I think, and now it's weighing away. Black Horizons does not exist and has not existed for about 8 years now. So I think it's a deliberate attempt to stop the progressive ideas of someone like Dr. Proctor.
You're absolutely right, Chris, because if the big America, when I have people tell me, oh, man, it's racism and Black discriminate against, I say, you're living in America and you're brown. What do you expect? Have you ever seen it any other way? Why is that a phenomenon? Okay, so Ralph and I talked about this many, many, many times. And what happens is we're not looking at the big picture again. Let's go. 1980, Ronald Reagan became president. The first thing he did was take the arts out of the schools. Are you aware of that? Well, I never missed a day of school from 7th grade to 12th grade because I loved going to school so much. I'd get sick on Friday and get well before Monday. But we had so much fun in school because we had the arts, we had sports, we had the trades in junior high, we had shops and stuff like that. School was wonderful. But then you take the arts out. But at Westinghouse, you may not know this, Rick, our orchestra won the state championship in '56. We outplayed everybody in the state of Pennsylvania, a little city high school. They don't even celebrate that. They're still talking about football, which is great. But football never won state, not even now. We couldn't even go there, but we won state. Don't even talk about it. First 2 Blacks in the Pittsburgh Symphony were in that orchestra. I was in that orchestra. My brother was in that orchestra. You know what I'm saying? Now they can't play Westinghouse forever, Rick. They can't even play the school song. They win a football game. The band goes out on the field. It's on the ground and they dance to a drum beat. They can't play. That's not an accident. Right. They know when you take the art of humans, school used to teach human beings to be functional citizens as adults. Now we're trying to teach. It's purposeful. Now we're teaching subjects. And I tell my students, you're not going to find a subject in life. When you get your degree, there's no subjects out there. There's only people. Can you deal with people? What do you mean? Okay, so this idea of subject-oriented education is another stupid idea. Teach the human being how to be a functional human being. So you get a PhD and you don't know what a bank does. You go into a bank and you don't know. I tell the PhD people, go into a mall with your paycheck, that good paying job, and come out at the other end with some money in your pocket. Because the high school graduates that are selling this stuff in there can know how to take the money out of your pocket and you don't know how to keep it because you never learned that. I've talked to PhDs in economics that don't know money. They don't know the financial system at all. They know the theories.
Well, I think to capture, recapture, progress in terms of liberatory, self-determining education, that we ourselves have that, number one, have that in our mind and in our design, wherever we're caught. So the Family Excellence Center, Jerry Taylor and the work they've done around education, and the group that has a suit still against the Pittsburgh Public Schools about discrimination. I know Tom and Nick and some of them are going to beat me. I should be able to call the name, Dr. Anthony Mitchell and others. But there's so many, and when you look back and you see when we were in our best state, I guess is what I want to say, is when the Africana Studies program, the Black Studies program at Pitt, was connected to the Black Student Organization at Westinghouse, was connected to Dr. Elmer Williams and 6 Mile Zion, having a very progressive, Dr. Taylor was a member of that congregation. I mean, there were linkages that made stuff work. And we have to, for instance, a very good thing, and I'm glad, I want to thank all of you all who are responsible for this forum today, that Dr. Proctor's book, Voices from the Firing Lines, let's start there, because it's a way to talk about people who may possibly be related to the people here in Pittsburgh that you talk to. So that always gets an interest going. That's my cousin, that's my uncle, that kind of thing. But it also puts it real down, as the late communicator Joe Madison would say, put it where the goats can get it. That's where we got to begin. Because once you establish that personal connection, like whatever bug really grabbed me, and I really think, and I've said this in many occasions, that we went into the auditorium at Westinghouse for a student, what do you call them things? I forgot what they are now.
Assemblies.
Assemblies, thank you. Well, they show these pictures, and at first we would see a little bit of the civil rights movement, so we're watching. You know, you see it 59, you came out, I came out in 69. So in the middle of that, you know, Malcolm gets killed. We see all of this stuff going on. Panther Party. But the main thing that struck me was those kids that looked like me getting hit with them fire hoses and cops on horses and stuff. And I'm like, first I was like, what is this about? Then I graduated to, yes, you guys fight for your rights. You know, that's what should be done. Then I really got to another level and they said, wait a minute, that ain't them, that's me. And look around me, okay, the exact things aren't happening, obviously, but we got the same problems. And talk to the older people, and they said, yeah, we weren't allowed to enter the front door here in Homewood. We had to go around the back and get our meal and all that kind of stuff. So that enraged me, and I've been off the reservation plantation since then. And so where we can connect that, and part of it is to keep that historical memory as part of the curriculum, as part of his programs. Black history is under attack by the system. Well, how did we do it back in the day? We did it through the church and the home.
That's
now
right.
We got communication tools that we could do it even better in a mass sense across our community. We got to do that. We got to pick up that responsibility.
You're right. And that's the way it was before. I never had a black teacher till I got toward the end of my undergraduate. I had all white teachers, but I had the family that taught. My one aunt taught at Belmar Elementary School in 1967. She's a master's degree from Pitt. She decided to teach Black history, and the board fired her for doing it. We never had Black history anywhere. Okay, I started in kindergarten. We read Little Black Sambo. That was our textbook in kindergarten.
That's Black history according to white folks, don't you
Right.
know?
But we were kids. But in the fourth grade, I'll never forget the music teacher. We were playing Stephen Foster songs. It was in the book, and the teacher was a piano player. And one day she came in and she said, "Students, take out your pencils. Everywhere you see the word darky, cross it out and write brother." And I couldn't figure out what she was talking about because I didn't know what a darky was. To summer, the darkies are gay. I thought the darkies was the way Southern people said doggy. And I could picture the kids playing and the dogs playing with them and all that. Brothers, what? I never heard that word before. But it seeps into you. So now let's transfer from fourth grade at Crescent School to University of Pittsburgh, third year graduate school of clinical psychology. And we're studying social psychology. And the textbook, Jake Malines was in my class. We were only two blacks in graduate school. And we knew each other from Westinghouse. But anyway, we were studying psychological testing and normalizing tests, okay? So we're reading this chapter. The book was written by the husband and wife couple called Monroe. They were the gurus of social psychology. And it said, if you do a test, you design a test, you have to normalize it on the population you're going to give it to. So if you would design a test, and back in those days, all the tests were tested on white northern freshman psychology students because they were available. So all the tests were normalized on them. Then it said, if you would give that test to some Asian Americans or something, the answers probably wouldn't be valid because you didn't normalize it on that population. And you're saying, that's logical, that's logical. The next sentence knocked me out of my seat. The next sentence said, of course, in cases of obviously inferior races like the Negro, this wouldn't be true. I'm in graduate school at Pitt, and it's in the textbook. And I raised my hand. I said, Dr. So-and-so, what am I supposed to do with this information? He says, what do you mean? I said, obviously inferior races like the Negro in a textbook? He didn't notice it. He said, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, well, just ignore that. I said, no, I tell you one thing. I guarantee you I'll word of this book. I'll pass your test. You can't stop me from passing your test, but I'll doggone it if I will read another word of this crap. I told him that right in class. What the hell do I care what he thinks? You know what I'm saying? But that's in the textbooks. What are you going to do about that? You show me some science books, I'll show you the racism.
Well, Columbus still discovered America. That's still in textbooks.
You're right. But we see, so the material, if it's content-based education, that's the point I'm making. If it's, and you don't know how to put the context into a meaningful position with your identity, you're jacked up. And there's nothing you can do about it until you get your identity together. And once you get your identity together, none of that bothers you. I was mentored by Fela Shawandi in graduate school. And he said the Yoruba say, if anybody calls you, it only matters what you answer to. If you know who you are, somebody call you out of your name, you don't answer to that unless that's who you think you are.
You mean like Skipper or Captain?
It doesn't matter if it's not what you identify. But you're the only person who has a right to put a label on yourself. And if you take a big look at how we use labels in our society, that's all you see in politics now, them throwing labels and dirty names and third grade stuff and throwing labels around. And they come up with a label like woke or come up with a label like CRT. They don't even know what it means. And you see now we have elected the stupidest people into politics. When 60 years ago at the March on Washington, or 65 years ago when they passed the Voting Rights Act, I said to myself, I wonder how long it's going to take for them to reverse it. I've lived long enough to see it. Here they are. Women are second-class citizens all of a sudden. A lot of them don't even know it.
If I might, I think we might get in. I felt Ralph hit me at the back of my head because we haven't mentioned the Hill District really. And I feel he's kind of like, I know y'all gonna mention the Hill District.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Ralph being a citizen rather of the Hill, and how did that figure and what he did, said, how he maneuvered and navigated himself. And it came to me that, and I'd be interested, part of this, Chris, what you think about this. I said to myself, I said, there's really five eras that Ralph participated in. There was the pre-Civic Arena. Now, I don't know if that goes all the way back
Mm-hmm.
to Wiley Avenue days, but you can enlighten us on that. There was the construction of the Civic Arena when all those folks were pushed out east and joined me. All of a sudden, all the white neighbors and kids I played with were gone, and it was all black folk.
Mm-hmm.
To the post reaction to that, you know, of course, the billboard at the top at St. Bridget de Moore at Freedom Corner saying you will go no further.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, there was a sustained reaction because I've talked about it for years, how that development took the core out of the economic, political, social, cultural heart of the black community. They scattered us to these. If you were lost, you couldn't find some of these public housing communities, Manchester and what was the West End. And, you know, you would have to go some to do that. And then finally, gentrification. And I think that is something all of us, if we're aware, are concerned about because we see our communities being changed in radical ways, and it really is another word for gentrification is the bleaching of. So I think all of those played significant kinds of things of what, as a very young person, he was able to observe, and as he matured, got educated, a lot of meat there, I think.
Well, I think that Ralph was in the vanguard of this movement in every field of endeavor he touched, whether it was hosting a TV program or working in education. And these were the times that we did make some progress, whether it was Brown versus the Board of Education, voting rights, or anything. Problem is, nobody will, how do I say this? Nobody will keep up those good faith efforts unless they're pressured by men like Ralph Proctor. Because he put it on them at first, and the gates just opened up. Training programs at WQED. They were training producers. They were training directors. They were training hosts, all kinds of stuff. They got nothing now. They put me out, you know, and I don't take this personally other than you got to fight all the time. We always had to fight to get something on the air on Black Horizons, particularly if it was controversial. When they first attacked the World Trade Center with the truck bomb, and I had guests on talking about if you understand an oppressed people and why they're fighting back, then you'll understand what happened there. And boy, they would get blown up and mad and everything. But if we don't keep that kind of pressure on them, if it's not there to be had, nobody is doing anything. Lisa Smith is the only one left. There used to be Black Chronicle on Channel 4. There was Black Impact, Walter Raleigh on 11. There was Black Horizons, Lynn Hayes Freeland show. I thought when she quit that they would quit. But evidently somebody, Lynn and others, kept up the pressure that there still should be a show there that addressed the Black community besides something that has been blown up, somebody being shot. And without that kind of constant pressure, Ralph was in the vanguard. He made it happen. But if we don't keep up that kind of pressure, all is lost because like Dr. Nelson said, how long will it take before they revoke that? How long will it take? They're working on it already.
Well, they're working on a lot of, that's so well put, Chris, but they're working on a lot of things. I'm not from the Hill, but I spent almost every night in the Hill when I was growing up. Wiley Avenue from Heron Avenue to the courthouse was 3 miles of retail stores open 24 hours a day. You didn't have to leave the Hill to get anything you wanted. and a dollar was changing hands 12 times in the Hill District. It only changes hands about 7 or 8 times in Squirrel Hill. Okay, so we don't see the integration of economics and geography and all those things. Where are the blacks on Bedford Avenue? Don't you know they moved them all out? Are you aware of that?
Yeah.
Well, why do you think they did that? You know, let me give you an example. I remember when nobody wanted to live on Grandview Avenue because it was so smoky in Pittsburgh. When I went to grade school, they had the street lights on at noon. It was so dark. And Grandview Avenue, you couldn't see the point from Grandview Avenue. Nobody wanted to live there. They cleaned the air. That becomes one of the best vistas in the United States, looking down on that point. And that real estate along Grandview Avenue is really expensive, right? Guess what? Bedford Avenue has the same view over the Allegheny. They're going to build luxury houses on Bedford Avenue. They had to move the Negroes out, and they're gone. Give you a little section 8 voucher.
We're not discriminating. If you can't afford the price of a house, that's your problem. Exactly. That's what they do. Sure. You know, you can move in, you want to, yeah, $1 million.
Right. And they plan that years ahead. Okay. Yeah. And so this is, we don't look ahead. We don't look at big picture, and they move us around like pieces on a chessboard because we're not paying attention. We're reacting. For instance, my brother Bob was an international drug and gang consultant for the State Department. He went all over the world dealing with drugs and gangs. How do kids in their neighborhood in the Hill or Homewood get guns from China and get drugs from South America and places like that? They're not leaving their neighborhood. Somebody's bringing that in. And there's a reason for it that's economic. If you check it out, we got almost $1 trillion business in transplant surgery, correct? Who are they putting those freshly killed organs into? Governor Casey lived 6 years on the heart and lung of a black kid shot in Manassas. Okay? David Rockefeller had 4, he lived to be 104. He had 4 or 5 heart transplants to keep him alive. What you need is freshly killed body parts for the raw material, right? But you can't just go out and kill people. But you can give drugs and guns to the teenagers and give them reasons to hate each other, and they'll shoot each other up, and you can farm their organs. And if you take a look at it, before that body gets to the funeral parlor, it's in the hospital, and the organs are taken out, and the liver sold on the black market for $75,000. The kidneys are sold somewhere, and the mother can't afford to pay for the funeral. That's what's happening, and it's been happening for the last 30 years or so. We don't see that. We don't talk about that. Why not? Why don't we know it? We're too busy reacting to some silly stuff that they keep us distracted on and not seeing what they're really doing.
Yes, thank you so much for the conversation that we've been having. We are preparing to transition into our next session, but as I think about what Stacey and I had intended for this conversation, you really were able to cut across these conversations so smoothly at the core of what we were interested in remembering about Dr. Proctor's life. How his scholarship helps us to think about the liberatory purposes of education, how that was very much embodied for him. And I think we're learning from you about his different motivations and his different philosophies of education, and that he was actually willing to act courageously within the institution, which is actually pressuring us to have different kinds of motivations, to have different kinds of understandings of the purposes that education should serve, and that he was actually doing this across educational contexts. I wonder if there are any brief like closing comments that you might have, perhaps that you didn't get to say about Dr. Proctor, but you might like to emphasize.
Well, the only thing that I can say is Ralph was a fighter for everybody. He was a fighter for justice. He was a fighter for inclusion before the word ever meant anything to anybody. He wants to make sure we got our share of the pie. And I appreciate all this work for doing that.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you all who are really carrying on the mantle and the example of Dr. Proctor. And in the environment that we find ourselves now, you used to have to go in school and see WQED, nothing against WQED, but you had to look at a little box and look at it there. And if you had a TV at home, it wasn't initially that everybody had their own TV. I mean, that's a recent development. But now the way we can text and we can simulcast like we're doing now in this hybrid format, I think that's particularly suited. It's always number one to do face to face if you can do it. But after that, oral history, I think, is uniquely situated to continue the dream, if you will. A lot of people, don't read books now. They listen to it, audio. So depending on your learning style, which is one of the things community colleges really dwell on, the adult learner and how they learn. And so we got to be more innovative and more kind of in your face in a way to get people to engage. And I'll just leave with that. Ralph and I both felt that it doesn't make sense to talk about college material. The literature, as we like to say, says about 70% of the jobs require you to have at least an associate degree level of higher education, whether you're going in a union, a police officer, whatever it is. And that's what we need to say to people. The folks now, there's still people now that say, well, I don't mess with computers. Really? Have you worked your microwave lately? Your car? What are you talking about? So we got to get a more forward thinking that's a mass shared skill set and value among our people.
I agree, Rick. And forward thinking is vision. Sight is history. Vision is looking into the invisible and seeing things that aren't yet manifest. And we're not teaching students that at all. We're teaching them what used to be. And sometimes that's pretty bad. I taught at Urban Pathway Charter School for 8 years, and their history book had the most recent president was Bill Clinton. And this was in 2015. So, you know what I'm saying? So you can't rely on the structures of the school system. Ralph knew that. We infiltrate the school system, and with academic freedom, whatever they allow you to do, then you have to do direct to the students. I know all my students by name. Students last semester, I knew every one of them by name. I make sure because they say to me, well, you teachers are responsible for what I say. Ralph would do the same thing. You stand tall as an individual to show people that they can be an individual. And we're swimming in dirty water. We don't have to even comment about that. The question is, how do you know how to do that to your advantage? Okay. Malcolm X said, if your mind is your weapon, you're never unarmed. Why aren't we doing that instead of pulling guns out? Because we're not passing on the fact that that is not power. Power, as Dr. King said, is controlling your own attitude. And that, you remember when they had the fire hoses and the dogs, Rick? They were afraid of the marchers. The marchers didn't have any arms. They were afraid of us, right? Because we have our attitude under control. And that's the first thing you got to do. If your attitude is out of control, then anybody can manipulate it. And that's what's happening. And you're reacting and you're a slave. Ralph knew that. We talked about it almost every conversation. We taught that way. And I'm going to continue to do it as long as I'm on the planet. But we need to get other teachers to start thinking like that and quit trying to get the little, the little rewards of the degree. I took my degrees off the wall. I got tired of looking at them. Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for your time and your labor with us, both preparing for the conversation, having a very compelling conversation in which I know I certainly learned, and I feel like our audience did too. I just want to say that in the Center for Urban Education, we value the contributions, the intellectual contributions of Dr. Ralph Proctor. And we thank you, Professors Adams, Harrison, Mr. Moore, for your comments today. Our next session is going to be up shortly. Thank you all so much for attending this morning's conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for the
you.
opportunity. Really
Amen.
pleasure to meet you too.